In January of 1914, one of the richest industrialists in America did something that made no sense to anyone watching. He walked into the most profitable factory in the country and announced that he was going to roughly double the wages of his workers overnight for no reason anyone had asked him to. His rivals were stunned. Some called him a traitor to his own class, a man who would wreck the natural order and ruin every other employer in the country. The newspapers treated it as an act of staggering generosity. And it worked. Thousands of desperate men flooded the gates, begging for these almost unbelievable jobs. But the truth behind that famous raise was never really about kindness. It was one of the most calculated business decisions ever made, and there was a catch buried inside it that history has mostly forgotten. This is the story of why the most famous raise in history was never the gift it appeared to be. Because power and money are never far apart. The man was Henry Ford. And to understand the raise, you first have to understand the misery that made it necessary. Ford had already changed the world by 1914. He had not invented the automobile, but he had done something arguably more important. He had figured out how to build it cheaply enough for ordinary people to own one. His great weapon was the moving assembly line, a system that broke the building of a car into small, simple, endlessly repeated steps. Instead of skilled craftsmen building a whole vehicle, a worker now stood in one spot and performed a single tiny motion over and over, hundreds of times an hour, as the car crawled past him on a moving belt. It was a miracle of efficiency. It was also, for the human being doing it, a special kind of torture. The work was so monotonous, so soul-crushing, so relentless in its pace that men simply could not stand it. They quit in staggering numbers. The factory was bleeding workers so fast that to keep a few thousand positions filled across a year, Ford was forced to hire tens of thousands of people because almost everyone walked away. Every man who quit had to be replaced and retrained, and that churn was quietly costing the company an enormous amount of money. The famous, efficient assembly line had a hidden wound. It chewed through human beings faster than they could be hired. So when Henry Ford announced his extraordinary new wage, the real motive was not the warm heart the newspapers imagined. It was this bleeding. At the higher pay, suddenly the unbearable job became bearable because the money was simply too good to walk away from. A man would endure the monotony, the noise, the deadening sameness of it, because nowhere else could a worker of his kind earn anything close. The result was exactly what Ford wanted. Men stopped quitting. The churn collapsed. The savings from a stable, experienced workforce more than paid for the raise. What looked like charity was, in cold accounting terms, one of the smartest investments the company ever made. But there was a second effect, and this is the part most often repeated, sometimes too simply. By paying his own workers well, Ford helped create a class of people who could afford to buy the very thing they were building. A man earning the new wage could, with care, save up and purchase a Ford automobile of his own. Multiply that across a whole industry, across a whole growing economy, and you begin to build something new in human history. A mass market. Ordinary working people with enough money in their pockets to become consumers of the products of their own labor. Ford himself later embraced this idea, the notion that well-paid workers were also customers. Whether he planned it that way from the very start is something historians still debate, but the pattern it pointed to would reshape the modern world. And now we reach the catch, the part of the story that the legend almost always leaves out. That famous wage was not simply handed over. To receive the full amount, a worker had to qualify for it, and qualifying meant submitting to something remarkable. Ford created a special division within his company, a department of inspectors whose job was to investigate the private lives of his employees. These men would visit workers' homes, They would check whether a man's house was clean, whether he drank too much, whether his family life met the company's standards of respectability, how he spent his money and his free time. Only workers who lived the way the company approved received the full pay. The rest were placed on a kind of probation and could be denied the full amount until they reformed. Sit with what that actually was. The most celebrated raise in industrial history came with a condition that the company got to reach past the factory wall and into a man's living room, his kitchen, his marriage, his habits. The money was real, but so were the strings. In exchange for that life-changing wage, a worker handed over a measure of control over his own private life that few of us today would accept. The generosity and the control were not two separate things. They were the same policy, two faces of one coin. Now, in fairness, the full picture is genuinely mixed, and honesty demands we hold both sides. For many of Ford's workers, that wage was transformative in the best sense. It lifted families into a stability and comfort they had never known, let them buy homes and educate children and live with a dignity that factory work had never before provided. Plenty of his employees were grateful and not naive to be so. And the inspectors, however intrusive, were partly aimed at helping immigrant workers settle and manage sudden prosperity, not only at controlling them. Ford was neither a simple saint nor a simple villain. He was a complicated man whose later years were marked by uglier conflicts and harsh resistance to his workers' organizing. The $5 day was, like the man himself, both genuinely good for many people and quietly built to serve his own ends. And that is the uncomfortable lesson folded into that famous number. We are taught to see the raise as a moment of pure benevolence, the rich man sharing his wealth out of the goodness of his heart. The reality is more interesting and more honest. It was a brilliant solution to a costly problem, a tool to build a market of customers, and a means of quiet control all at once, and the workers benefited and submitted in the very same breath. The same pattern runs through the perks and benefits of our own age, the generous-sounding offers that bind as much as they reward, where it can be genuinely hard to tell where the gift ends and the leverage begins. Henry Ford understood that better than almost anyone. He just dressed it brilliantly as a gift, because power and money are never far apart. Discovery continues.